Most Haunted Highways. Chapter 1, Introduction. I've been driving long-haul freight for 14 years, and if you'd asked me back then what scared me about the job, I'd have said black ice, or deer at dusk, or the particular exhaustion that creeps up on you around hour 10 when the white lines start doing that hypnotic thing where they seem to breathe. Ordinary trucker fears. Practical ones. My name's Garrett Holloway, and I drive a route that takes me through 6 states hauling refrigerated freight, produce, mostly, sometimes pharmaceuticals, always on a schedule tight enough that stopping to rest feels like a luxury I can't quite afford. I've got a rhythm to the life. Coffee at the Pilot outside Knoxville. A particular diner in western Kansas where the waitress knows my order before I sit down. My rig, a 2019 Freightliner I've named Bessie with the kind of affection you develop for something that's kept you alive through some genuinely bad weather, has over 400,000 miles on her and still purrs like she's got something to prove. I love the job in the way you love something that's shaped your whole adult life. The solitude of it. The particular piece of an empty highway at 3 a.m. with the radio playing low and nothing but headlights and stars for company. I've never been a superstitious man. Never believed in much beyond bad breaks and worse weather. That changed on a stretch of Route 9 that truckers along my usual corridor call the corridor, though it doesn't have that name on any official map, just a lonely 80-mile ribbon of 2-lane blacktop cutting through farmland and dead forest in the part of the country where 3 states meet at odd angles and nobody quite claims responsibility for maintaining the road. I'd avoided it for years, honestly, taking the longer interstate route instead, not because of any ghost story but because the pavement out there was rough enough to rattle a load loose if you weren't careful. But a bridge closure that October forced my hand, rerouted half the regional freight traffic onto that stretch whether we liked it or not, and I remember sitting in my cab at the on-ramp, engine idling, feeling something I couldn't quite name settle low in my stomach. Other drivers had stories about the corridor. I'd heard them at truck stops over the years, the way you hear any road legend, half joke, half warning, always told by someone who swore they weren't superstitious either, right before launching into an account that made the hair on your arm stand up despite yourself. Headlights that appeared in your mirrors on empty stretches and then simply weren't there when you checked twice. CB chatter that came through garbled with a voice nobody could quite place, asking for help nobody could quite locate. I'd always dismissed it as road mythology, the kind every long stretch of isolated highway seems to accumulate eventually. Truckers get lonely. Lonely minds fill empty miles with stories. I pulled onto Route 9 at 11:40 that night with a full load of refrigerated produce and a delivery window I couldn't afford to miss, and I told myself, easing Bessie up to speed on that dark, cracked pavement, that nothing about the next 80 miles would be any different from the thousands of ordinary miles I'd already driven in my life. I was wrong within the first 20. Chapter 2, Strange Events. The first thing I noticed was the radio. My CB, which usually crackled with the low, familiar chatter of other drivers along the route, call signs, weather updates, the occasional joke passed between strangers who'd never meet face to face, had gone almost completely silent the moment I turned onto Route 9. Not the ordinary silence of an empty channel. A pressed down, deliberate quiet, like something had reached out and turned the volume of the whole world down a notch. I fiddled with the dial, checked the connections, told myself it was just a dead zone, one of those stretches where terrain blocks the signal. Happens all the time out in farm country. I didn't think much of it, not yet, focusing instead on the road itself, narrow and poorly lit, the double yellow lines faded almost to nothing under my headlights. About 30 miles in, my headlights caught something on the shoulder that made my foot ease off the gas before my brain had fully processed what I was looking at. A hitchhiker, standing perfectly still at the edge of the road, thumb out, dressed in clothes that looked decades out of fashion, a canvas jacket, work boots, a cap pulled low. I slowed instinctively, the old habit of a driver who's picked up plenty of stranded travelers over the years, and in the half-second it took me to consider stopping, my headlights swept past him and the shoulder was simply empty. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. No one walking away, no one ducking into the tree line, just empty gravel shoulder and darkness stretching back the way I'd come. Trick of the light, I said out loud, my own voice sounding thin and unconvincing in the cab. I've talked to myself on long hauls for years, it's a normal thing drivers do to stay alert, but this time the words felt like they were meant to convince someone other than just me. 45 minutes later, the CB crackled back to life without warning, startling me so badly I nearly drifted out of my lane. A voice came through, thin and distorted, breaking up with static in a way that didn't match the clear night sky and calm weather. Anybody out there, need help? Anybody copy? I grabbed the mic, heart hammering. This is Bessie, I copy, what's your location, over. Silence. Then, faint beneath the static, something that might have been a voice repeating the same 3 words, over and over, too distorted to make out clearly, though something in the rhythm of it made my skin crawl before I could even understand why. The transmission cut out entirely a few seconds later, and no amount of scanning channels brought it back. I pulled into a closed rest stop about 10 miles further on, just to catch my breath, hands shaking slightly on the wheel in a way that embarrassed me even alone in my own cab. The rest stop was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned one along a rural stretch: cracked asphalt, a boarded vending machine, a single flickering light over a picnic table nobody had sat at in years. I sat there with the engine idling, working up the nerve to keep driving, and that was when I noticed the marks. Scratched into the picnic table, dozens of them, layered over each other like something had been carved and recarved in the same spot over a long period of time. Not words, not quite, more like tally marks, except they radiated outward from a central point in a pattern that made no logical sense, like whoever made them had been counting something that didn't follow the ordinary rules of counting. I didn't get out to look closer. I put Bessie back in gear and got moving, telling myself the sooner I cleared this stretch of highway, the sooner I could stop feeling like something was watching me do it. Chapter 3, Darkness Grows. The fuel gauge told me I needed to stop again around the 50-mile mark, which put me at a lonely truck stop called Marrow's, a squat cinderblock building with 2 pumps and a light in the window that looked more like an afterthought than an invitation. I hadn't planned on this stop, hadn't even known it existed until my GPS flagged it, but I was running low enough that I didn't have much choice. The attendant was an older man, thin as a fence post, with the particular weathered stillness of someone who'd spent a long time in a quiet place learning not to react to much of anything. His name tag said Eldon. He watched me fill up through the window without coming outside, and when I went in to pay, he studied my face for a long moment before ringing me up. "You drove in from the east?" he asked. "Yeah. Route 9, the whole way." Something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or a kind of weary sympathy. Most drivers who take that road at night stop talking about it pretty quick once they've done it a few times. "You see anything unusual out there?" I told him about the Hitchhiker, the CB transmission, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth, half expecting him to laugh. He didn't laugh. He set down the receipt he'd been about to hand me and leaned forward on the counter, voice dropping low. This stretch of roads had trouble for a long time. Longer than most folks around here like to talk about. He glanced toward the dark window, toward the highway beyond it, like he expected something to be listening. There was an accident back in '68. Bad one. A whole family, driving home late from a wedding, hit a patch of black ice about 15 miles past here and went into the ravine. Took search crews 3 days to find the car, it went down so deep into the trees. By the time they found it, well. He didn't finish that sentence. Didn't need to. "That's terrible," I said, "but I don't see what that's got to do with what I saw tonight." Because that wasn't the only accident. Not by a long shot. Something about this road, ever since then, seems to draw drivers toward the same stretch, the same time of night, over and over across all these years. Locals stopped calling it a coincidence a long time ago. His eyes met mine, steady and serious. "You said the CB voice was repeating 3 words. You catch what they were?" I hadn't, not clearly, but sitting there in that dim little store with Eldon's careful attention on my face, the memory sharpened suddenly, the distortion clearing in my mind the way a word you couldn't place sometimes surfaces later, complete and undeniable. Help us cross." Eldon's face went very still when I told him. That's what my brother heard too, the year before he stopped driving this route for good. Said it near broke something in him, hearing that, and not being able to find a single soul on that whole stretch of road to help. I asked him what he thought it meant. He was quiet for a long moment, ringing up my purchase with hands that had gone slightly unsteady. "I think there's things out there that never made it where they were going," he said finally. "And I think they've been asking for a long time for somebody to finish the trip with them." I got back on the road with considerably less confidence than I'd had an hour before, watching my mirrors more than the road ahead, every shadow at the edge of my headlights suddenly loaded with possibility. Chapter 4, Terror. The next 20 miles passed without incident, which somehow made the tension worse rather than better, my whole body strung tight waiting for something to happen, the anticipation itself becoming its own kind of exhausting fear. Then, rounding a long curve where the trees pressed close on both sides, my headlights caught something that made my stomach drop clean through the floor of the cab. A car. An old sedan, decades out of style, sitting motionless in the middle of my lane with no hazard lights, no movement, nothing to explain why it would be stopped dead in the road at midnight. I stood on the brakes, Bessie's full weight groaning in protest, the trailer fishtailing slightly before I brought her to a shuddering stop maybe 30 feet from the sedan's rear bumper. I sat there gasping, heart slamming, staring at that car through my windshield. No brake lights. No exhaust visible in my headlights despite the cold night air. Just a still, dark shape blocking the road like it had always been there, like it belonged to the asphalt itself. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab, legs unsteady beneath me, approaching slowly with every instinct screaming that I shouldn't be doing this, that I should be getting back in my truck and finding another way around. But some deeper compulsion kept me moving forward, the same pull, I'd later understand, that had probably drawn dozens of drivers before me toward this exact spot on this exact road. The car was empty. Doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition, a woman's cardigan folded neatly on the passenger seat like whoever had been driving had simply stepped out for a moment and never come back. The license plate, when I checked it with my flashlight, was a style discontinued decades ago, rust creeping through letters I couldn't quite make sense of. That was when I heard the crying. Faint, coming from somewhere down the embankment beside the road, a child's voice, frightened and small, calling out words I could just barely make out over the wind moving through the trees. "Mommy? Mommy, I can't find the road." Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was exactly the kind of situation you're supposed to walk away from, that a woman's cardigan folded neatly in an empty antique car parked dead center in a haunted road was not a scene that ended well for anyone who investigated further. But I've got 2 kids of my own back home, and something about that small, frightened voice overrode every ounce of caution I had left. I went down the embankment, flashlight sweeping through the dark trees, calling out that I was there to help, that everything was going to be okay. The crying grew closer, then suddenly stopped altogether, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Then, from directly behind me, close enough that I felt breath against the back of my neck, a voice, not a child's voice at all now, but something layered and wrong, 3 tones speaking at once, whispered 4 words that dropped my whole body into ice. "Help us cross too." I turned and there was nothing there. Just trees, and darkness, and my own ragged breathing loud in my ears. But when I scrambled back up the embankment to my truck, the antique sedan was gone entirely, no tire tracks, no indication it had ever been parked there at all, and my hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get my key into the ignition. Chapter 5, The Truth. I didn't drive another mile that night. I sat in my cab on the shoulder with the doors locked and the engine running, waiting for dawn with a kind of white-knuckled patience I'd never needed before in 14 years of driving, and the moment the sky started graying toward morning, I called Eldon's number, which he'd written on the back of my receipt just in case, and asked him if he'd meet me for coffee once I made it through to the other side of the corridor. He was waiting at a diner near the highway's end when I finally cleared that stretch of road, looking like a man who hadn't fully expected me to make the call, and he listened to my account of the previous night with a grim unsurprised expression that told me he'd heard versions of this story more times than he probably wanted to count. "The family from 68, he said slowly, once I'd finished. "There were 4 of them in that car. A mother, a father, and 2 kids. But when the search crews finally found the wreck, they only recovered 3 bodies. The younger child, a girl, maybe 6 years old, was never found. Search parties combed those woods for weeks. Not a trace." I felt something cold settle into my chest, remembering that small, frightened voice calling out for her mother from the dark trees. "There's more," Eldon continued, staring down into his coffee like it might offer him something steadier to look at than my face. "That wasn't an isolated accident, not really. Turns out that stretch of road had a design flaw the county never properly fixed, a bad camber on the curve, worse drainage than anywhere else along that route. Black ice formed there faster and thicker than anywhere else nearby, and for almost 15 years before anyone finally addressed it, that same curve claimed at least 9 more lives that we know of. Probably more that never made the official record. Why didn't they fix it sooner? Money. Politics. The usual reasons things that should get fixed don't." His jaw tightened. By the time the county finally repaved that stretch properly in the early 80s, it was already too late for a lot of families. And I don't know how else to explain what people like you and my brother have experienced out there. I think something about all that unfinished tragedy never fully left the road. All those people who never made it to where they were going. All that unresolved grief and fear, soaked into the asphalt itself, still looking for someone to finally help them cross to wherever they were originally headed. "The little girl," I said quietly. "You think that was her? Still out there, still lost, after almost 60 years. Eldon's eyes met mine, old and tired and sad in a way that made the horror of the previous night settle into something closer to grief. "I think there's a lot of them out there, all still looking for the same thing. And I think the ones who go looking for them, trying to help, don't always come back the way they went in." I thought about that antique car, the folded cardigan, the way it had simply vanished by the time I climbed back up that embankment. I thought about the voice that had followed me through the trees, 3 tones layered into one, asking to be helped across in a road that had apparently never stopped taking new arrivals to add to whatever waited on the other side of that unfinished crossing. Chapter 6, Final Nightmare. I should have taken the long way home. Every rational instinct told me to reroute through the interstate, add the extra 4 hours to my trip, put as many miles as possible between myself and Route 9 for the rest of my driving career. But my delivery schedule left no room for detours, and some stubborn, foolish part of me convinced myself that daylight would be different, that whatever haunted that road only reached out after dark. I was wrong about that too, though it took until dusk, driving back through on my return route 2 days later, for the horror to fully reassert itself. The light was failing fast as I approached that same long curve, shadows pooling thick beneath the trees, and my CB crackled to life with that same distorted static I'd heard on the way in. This time, though, the voice came through clearer, closer, layered with an urgency that raised every hair on my arms. "Found someone. Finally found someone who'll help." I gripped the wheel hard, forcing myself to keep driving, refusing to slow down no matter how badly the pull tugged at me to stop, to look, to help whatever was calling out from that dark stretch of road. But as I rounded the curve, my headlights swept across the embankment and caught a sight that stopped my heart cold in my chest. Dozens of figures, standing motionless among the trees, watching the road with a patience that had clearly been sharpened by decades of waiting. Men, women, children, dressed in clothes spanning 50 years of fashion, all facing the highway with the same fixed, hopeful attention, as though every vehicle that passed represented one more chance at whatever crossing they'd been denied. And standing closest to the road, small and achingly familiar, was the little girl, her cardigan-clad mother's shape hovering protectively just behind her, both of them watching my truck approach with an expression that broke something loose and grieving in my chest even through the terror. I didn't stop. God forgive me, I didn't stop, foot pressed hard to the gas, watching in my mirrors as that entire assembly of lost souls receded into darkness behind me, and just before the curve swallowed them from view entirely, I saw the little girl raise one small hand, not in anger, not in threat, but in something that looked unbearably like a wave goodbye to someone who'd almost stayed to help. I made it through the corridor that night and never drove that route again, rerouting permanently through the interstate no matter how many extra hours it cost me, no matter how many times dispatch questioned the change. I told Eldon what I'd seen, and he simply nodded, unsurprised, the way a man nods at a story he's already heard in a dozen different voices from a dozen different drivers over a long, tired career of hearing it. I still think about that little girl's raised hand more than I'd like to admit. Some nights, driving other roads entirely, hundreds of miles from Route 9, I catch my CB crackling with static that shouldn't be there, and beneath it, faint, unmistakable, three tones speaking as one, asking the same three words they've apparently been asking for almost 60 years. Last month, delivering a load through an entirely different state, my radio caught a fragment of chatter from a driver I didn't recognize, voice tight with the particular fear I now know all too well, describing an old sedan parked dead center on a lonely stretch of highway, a folded cardigan on the passenger seat, and a child's voice crying somewhere in the dark trees beyond the shoulder. I haven't been able to make myself respond to him yet. I keep telling myself I will, that I'll warn him the way Eldon warned me. But some nights, sitting alone in my cab with the engine idling and the dark pressing close against my windshield, I wonder if that's really what the corridor does, not just claim new travelers for itself, but recruit the ones who survive it into carrying its call forward, one road, one radio, one driver at a time, until eventually all of us are just another voice in the static, asking someone new to finally help us cross.